I'm sorry that I'm late, but I would want to ask this question on whether, for us in the PWD sector, the essence of PDAO is really not only for the programs and services for persons with disability, but to influence the community to be able to come up with support system or mechanism to the persons with disability. My question is, do you empower the persons with disability by following the IRR on PDAO, where the head of the PDAO should be a person with disability? And then secondly, nawala to second question ko. Yun muna yung una. And then the second one is, of course, the PDAO that we're talking about is not under the SWD, but a separate department. That's
okay. I would like to answer.
Yung pong una on PWD preference, actually the synthesis would also touch on that. I think most of the people we interviewed, part of the PDAO, part of the local government, recognize the need for PWDs to be represented in the PDAO. Not only in PDAO, supposedly 10% din po ng staff complement ng local government. But surprisingly, as would be explained later by our director and project leader, hindi po unanimous yung statement regarding the head of PDAO being PWD. So we're only sharing our findings po. Na yun po yung findings, yun po yung feedback from the ground that for some of them, it might, tulad po nung shinare ko kanina, ay pala, sa presentation pala ng synthesis, it might be difficult daw if all the staff of PDAO would be PWDs. Yung pong sa head naman kasi nakalagay ay preference. Preference. Tama po, di ba? Yung po nakalagay sa batas, ma'am. Apa, preference for PWD. Apa.
Okay. Other questions?
Just to comment again on the first one. Yeah, I think if we review the law, it's written preferably. Well, at least in the case of Angeles City, when we would interview the beneficiaries, the PWD staff, and well, the sector representatives, well, what came out is that's why I placed it in one of the main findings, that it becomes more acceptable to the sector if they had this PWD. But they have, again, like what I said in the presentation, raised that for the staff, they think that it should be a mix. No? On the second question, for the case of Angeles City, they really ensured that it's under the mayor's office. Like they made sure it's not under TSWDO or it's the SWDO.
For the second question, ma'am, if you were able to compare the experiences of Carmona and San Lorenzo Ruiz Camarines Norte, you could see the stark difference. Even just the budgets were very, very worlds apart. Carmona has 10 million, San Lorenzo Ruiz has 300,000 that they would have to manage for the entire year. Whether the PDAO office should be separate from the MSWDO, I don't think, even in the case of SLR, that they were contemplating on maintaining the office under the MSWDO. The ordinance itself stated that it will be a separate office immediately under the office of the mayor. But operationally, they were not able to do it because number one, they did not have enough resources to appoint a permanent PDAO. Second of all, they do not have the enough resources to appoint additional staff just for the office. So what they're doing is that the agricultural technologist is having double work as an agricultural technologist and PDAO, while the MSWDO staff would have to double work on their work in the MSWDO as well as working for the PDAO. And those are realities. I think even the legal framework within San Lorenzo Ruiz recognized that it should be a separate office, but the different realities, it depends on the type of municipality that there are. So maybe situations like Carmona, it's easy for them. They can even have a building, an office, they have programs, but for other municipalities, it takes a while for them to be able to comply with the law and the rules and regulations.
My response is relative to the first question, and citing the case of Camarines Norte and a municipality there. The ordinance, the provincial ordinance states that the PDAO head shall be a PWD. It is clear in the provincial ordinance. While in some cases, in the case of Mercedes, also in the same province, the ordinance has a preference for a PWD. But the problem in Mercedes is that they have difficulty in finding one who is willing to take the post of being the PDAO. So they've been finding for, I think, almost more than a year already. And it's still a difficulty until March when we went there. And their solution for now is to find someone who has a heart for the sector. And we were, at that point, it's difficult to gauge that statement of having a heart. But probably if we look at the case of Mandaluyong, someone who is with the sector for a long time already, who has skills and really compassion for the sector. But it's as to that statement, it's quite difficult for me now to gauge the meaning of that heart for the sector. But in relative to that question, one of the difficulties finding a PWD who is willing to take on the post as the PDAO head.
Okay, I think...
Briefly lang po, yung sa Angeles City, tama ba? Angeles City, I think, has introduced different qualifications for the PDAO head. Like, they want engagement in the disability sector for the last 5 years. Tapos, leader of a PWD organization. Wala pong PWD preference sa kanila. So, that's something worth exploring.
Okay, I think Sir Mike Limon of NCDA has some points to raise.
I have 2 questions to ask. First, what was the basis for selecting the case studies? And second is, how much of the law was used as a reference for the research? Thank you.
I think that would be answered later, but if you want to answer it now, you may briefly answer.
Very quickly lang po, but the director will answer later. So yung 7, initially 6 lang po, naging 7 LGUs. We selected them based on the list from the NCDA workshop December of 2017. Kasi sabi po ng NCDA, these are the LGUs who have good practices. So that's how we started. Sa NCDA, kasi that's our starting point. Ano po isang question? How much of the law? Yung kung we reviewed the law, and then for our questionnaire, which we pilot tested through our RTB, most of the critical ingredients in the law, we included in our questions. So we validated for whether this is the reality on the ground, are the LGUs compliant in this requirement, did they observe this? So, andun po sila. So, nasa cases po. 5 minutes lang po kasi yung presentation natin. So, hindi po ma-capture.
Any other questions? Yes, sir?
Let me clarify lang ako sa statistics ng Angeles. Sabi niyo 400,000 yung population, tama? Tapos ang sabi niyo 3,000 lang yung PWD. Tama?
Yes po.
Tapos
Yun po yung nakalagay.
Tama na, oo, hindi na. Okay, tama?
Yes po.
Okay, tapos 0.8% sabi niyo?
0.8 po.
Oh, mali.
0.8%.
Mali ang statistics. Paki-check ang statistics. Okay. 8%, yung Valenzuela, 600,000, 20,000 na yung population eh. Eh kaya 400,000 lang. Or 8% pa. Ano lang sila, 1 point sa Valenzuela. 3.3% lang yung 20,000 and 600. Eh kayo 400,000 lang, 3,000 lang yung WZ. Mali, di ba? Okay, thank you.
Okay, they will look into that. Thank you very much. Do you have, yes sir?
Sige po, i-correct po namin.
Okay, we have a question from the Asia Foundation.
Hello clarification lang. For the, hindi lang siguro nabanggit, pero just to clarify dun sa cases na somehow para may constituted PDAO, sa cases na Angeles, Mandaluyong, at Camarines Norte, and Valenzuela. Hindi na clear kung yung PDAO head ba ay department head, kagaya nung sa Carmona. At saka second dun sa clarification of the budget, na-mention ang case ng Angeles na in your investigation, lumalabas na parang 2 million lang yung appropriated for PWDs. So, in the other cases, may nakita ba kayong ganong specific line item sa budget nila, or mas kinoconsider ito na cross-cutting na parang mayroon sa agriculture, mayroon sa na sinasabi nila na for PWDs, or talagang mayroong specific line item for the PWD. So yun. Thank you.
So I think meron naman po sa lahat ng cases, meron pong line item na budget na for the office, no, for PWD. But we also observe, no, there are budgets that are not under the office, but let's say, for example, they are in funding under the Office of Agriculture or Office of the DRRMO, but these are PWD tagged budgets. But basically because they are used for the benefits of PWDs. For example, dun sa DRRMO project in Camarines Norte, there's a training for disaster risk responders, and they are teaching them on how to be PWD sensitive in doing disaster response and all other activities relative to disaster risk.
So lahat po yung offices mayroon namang sariling budget. Usually they tap the GAD fund, tapos budget ng DRMO, tapos yung budget ng may portion for yung sa employment, yung may mga peso. And then yung may scholarship or education, meron din po sila usually yung budget ko. Yun po yung usual na mga pinag-source nila ng funds. Tapos as to, sa amin po, division po sa Mandaluyong, sino pa yung, sa Angeles CTI division? Office.
Program yun.
Under po, yung sa Angeles po, under po siya ng Office of the Mayor na program-based po siya.
Sa Valenzuela po, under the Office of the Mayor. So it's siya department level.
Sa San Lorenzo Ruiz, it's supposed to be an office, but the person holding the office is not a department head level.
Sa Carmona, Cavite po kasi noong 2017, naging independent department na po siya. So yung department, yung PDAO head po is department head 1.
Okay. Other questions from this side? This side? Or yes, ma'am.
Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Thank you po sa inyong case studies to the different provinces. This is just a clarification also. Maybe iba po ang model na ginagamit natin when you use your research. But for, so I don't know how to call it, perspective. But if you follow the UNCRPD, you call the psychosocial mental disabilities, ano po ba, iklaro lang natin. Tapos meron kay group. And then the data that you asked, or from them, is it disaggregated? Also for the deaf, hindi po kami ata kasama sa communication disability. Well, this is our right. We want to be called deaf. Thank you.
I-release po ulit siya. Sensya na po, nauna po kami nag-present. I-release po ulit siya na point po ng director po namin later about the definition po of disability. So the information that we gave you, the profile, we processed the database that we got. So kung ano po yung ginamit po nilang terms doon, we just presented it as is. As mapapansin nyo, iba nga walang gender, Yung iba walang age, so hindi po uniform yung information available. Tapos, kasama din po sa recommendation ma'am to adapt the psychosocial, not just the medical approach to disability. Yes, but the director will elaborate later.
Okay, from the back, do you have questions? Dr. Bernardo? We'll have the, yes sir. And then after sir, Dr. Bernardo, will you be asking questions also?
Okay, good afternoon. Clarification din dun sa mga na-bisita niyong LGUs, ano din yung ang title niya is naka-angkla na dun sa IRR, which is supposedly ang head ay Disability Affairs Officer. And then pangalawa, ito ba ay permanent o co-term pa rin?
Okay, can we get one question, then we answer the two questions later?
Sa Carmona case po kasi, yung department head 1 po, permanent position po yun. Pero hindi po siya daw department head 1 po since independent department po yung sa Carmona Cavite.
Kahit po independent po siya, it should be, we should follow the IRR, which is, kasi kung maganda naman po yung relationship natin with the LGUs, might as well, follow na po natin yung sa, yung sabihin, i-retitle po yung position from department. Kahit po department na dyan, ang supposed ay DAO 4 po yan.
I think we have foreign friends in the audience, so I request everyone to please speak English.
So, only Camarines Norte and Carmona. The rest po, non-DAO.
Hindi rin daw nga
only po, Camarines Norte applied the Disability Affairs Officer na nomination.
Only that in the case of Camarines Norte, the law states that it should be a DAO 4, but its current status, it's DAO 3 at the moment. But I think that the office is doing something to address this concern, proposing that the DAO 3 should be elevated to DAO 4, and also doing a proposal to have permanent staff at the PDAO, because as you see in the report earlier, currently only the PDAO head is a permanent, is with the permanent status, and the rest is a job order or non-tenured staff.
In the case of Angeles, right now we have the OIC as the PDAO head, but for the by virtue of the ordinance number 435, the Angeles City will now institute a DAO 4 for the next fiscal year.
You also have, okay, we have a question here.
Good afternoon, Michael from Bisuda International. Actually, I have 3 questions. I don't know if someone answered before because I didn't understand most of the conversation. I'm sorry. I'll try my translator to be into it today. First one, how accurate is your data collection? And what the tools and methods used for collecting this data? And do you have any online documentation for all this? Because one of the cases, San Lorenzo, I think there's data loss, right? Second question, it's about the method and the program that you're using for the anti-discrimination and anti-bullying program. So what's the program that you use, or what's the method that you're using for the anti-discrimination? And the third one, it's about, do you have any programs for empowerment, the leadership skills for BWDs or not?
The first question was, how did you collect data for the research? And how accurate is the data?
So we did key informant interviews, questionnaire, survey, and then for the profile, we use the data from the offices. They gave us either the printout, if they're not comfortable in giving us the Excel files. So the printout or the PDF versions. For others, they gave us the electronic versions, the Excel files, and then we process that. We did a survey, which the director would present earlier, you would explain. was it? Anti-bullying. Oh. I don't remember, no? I don't think so. I think for most of the cases, since the coverage is RA 170, we only ask them what they monitor. So most I think they do advocacy work, orientation, but as to monitoring and how they implement anti-bullying and anti-discrimination, there's not much initiatives yet by the local governments.
10070.
About
170.
10070.
170 lang yun eh. Ito ay 10070.
10070.
Kasi 170.
Sorry. Sorry. As to whether the cases would be available, is that another question?
The last question is, are there programs to enhance leadership skills of PWDs? Am I right?
Maybe the people in the audience would know better, or NCDA would be better equipped to answer that question later during the panel. Okay.
Okay, other questions? We have 10 more minutes. I'm sorry, 5 more minutes for this. Yeah, we have until 35 for this.
Presentation. Maybe we are visually impaired, so we can access the information shown in front by computer.
Okay, just approach the secretariat later, sir. Yes, ma'am. Last question.
Since earlier you have mentioned that the PDAO heads or the one manning the PDAO offices are either appointee or from different sources, no? Since it has the PDAO position is actually should be from quality standards from the Civil Service Commission. Why is it that so why is it?
Hello.
Ayun. So why is it that the PDAO heads, the people manning the PDAO are coming from different sources, knowing that the law has QS or quality standards to follow to secure the person that should be manning PDAO? Because there's a QS that's prescribed by Civil Service Commission to secure the person to man the PDAO. But based on the cases reported earlier, the PDAO heads or the people manning the PDAO are coming from different sources.
I think this speaks of the different realities in every local government. And while all government positions are governed by civil service rules, we will also have to look into the different realities of every local government. For example, you might have, the local government might want to follow QS from civil service. Sometimes it's difficult to find someone who would like to apply for this position. They might be gainfully employed in the private sector, might be giving up more income if they're going into government. We don't know specifically. Sometimes there are people who are not within the boundaries of the local government, but maybe residents of neighboring municipalities, and they are automatically excluded from the selection. For example, there are municipalities which could not afford to appoint a permanent office head, so they might appoint people who have QS, but will not be able to afford paying a department head level position. So those would be the nuances that you'd have to look into, which varies from one local government to another. And I think those are realities of decentralization in the Philippines. It would be easier if there's a national law that says that once you appoint a PDAO, national government is going to fund that. But unfortunately, this is an unfunded mandate.
the same case applies not only to PDAO, to other newly introduced positions in the local government. It's not as if the disability sector is targeted. Parang ganun po. It's a reality of local government appointments and human resource.
Okay, we don't have much time, so I would like to thank the case writers. You may now go back to your chairs. Okay, that was a lively Q&A session.
I'm Erwin Alampay, the director of the Center for Local Regional Governance. First of all, I'd like to thank our case writers for admirably answering your questions, and hopefully have exhausted all your questions and have nothing left afterwards. Anyway, much of the details they know. What I'm trying to do is to synthesize all the different cases. You all know that when we talk about a case, they're not meant to be generalizable. But the objective of the research is actually to know, okay, what's happening since the IRR was released. And considering that the IRR was released only in 2016, the kind of evaluation we could do is more of a process evaluation. You won't see the impact yet. Okay, so today I'll talk about a synthesis based on a number of things we tried to do given the limited time. So I'll first talk about the project, and then I'll talk a bit about what we found in the literature, and then the situation of the PDAO based on some key informant interviews, and then a quick rundown of the 7 cases which we already heard today, and then finally some conclusions and recommendations coming out from this rapid appraisal. So basically about the project, the project that was assigned to us was to look at how the law 10070 is being implemented, particularly the implementing rules and regulations. And we started off with a roundtable discussion a few months ago, and I think some of you were there. Roundtable discussion with people involved with persons with disabilities at the National Capital Region. And then we did some awareness surveys. Okay, now I just have to caution that the awareness survey is not randomized. It's very convenient. Largely, we ran the survey from our own clients in the Center for Local Regional Governance, administered them to primarily councilors and local legislators to gauge how PDAO is being implemented, or if it's being implemented in their locality, how they understand it to be implemented, and then so hence it's not very systematic. If the question is how reliable that survey is, it's just for us to gauge, okay, how it's being implemented in a wider scale, because we only have 7 cases. And then we also gathered secondary data from the ILG with respect to the status of PDAO, because they also monitor them. And then we had the 7 case studies, and we'll try to I'll try to synthesize what we found similar or different from the 7 cases, and then we also did some key informant interviews with non-PDAO sites, particularly with respect to the issues or problems they are encountering with its implementation. So the questions, what are the questions that 7 cases try to answer? Okay, first is how compliant are they with respect to the law, with respect to following the selection process, the qualifications of the PDAO heads, whether they are being budgeted. Okay, how functional are the PDAOs, and what are their programs and projects? What is the profile of the PDAO heads? The selection process, do they have a General Assembly? Do they have functional federations? And hence, we try to think of what are the factors that affect PDAO establishment. Okay? So they have different stories. If you listen carefully, why it happened, again, the stories will be different from each LGU. It's hard to generalize. And then what then are some policy structural process recommendations emanating from the study. So we'll talk about the literature. Some literature says PWDs compose 1.57% of the Philippine population. And I'm mentioning that because it's interesting, because in the cases, it ranged from less than 1% to a high of 3.3%. And that would signify a problem, perhaps. I mean, of course, this is not randomly selected cases. But later on, we'll talk about, I mean, from listening from the cases, you'd realize that, wait, are they measuring the same things? Are they measuring the deaf? Are they measuring the blind? Are they measuring, I mean, do they define it the same way? And if you look at the cases, they present, I mean, the data that they presented came from the LGUs, and the LGUs are actually presenting different disaggregated data. So the problem then is, can you actually compare PWD population from LGU to LGU? Okay? Statistically, you'd expect it to be around 1.57% if we follow this. They also said there's limited access to various services, health, employment, rehabilitation, assistive devices, education, social welfare, disaster management. And again, this is important. I mean, why do you mention this in the literature? Okay, because these are all development goals. And these are also development goals, and if you look at the projects mentioned in the cases, they talk about assistive devices, they talk about education, they talk about employment. Okay? So there's limited access. So the premise, again, on the importance of representativeness, of representation, is there. I mean, it's in the literature. And I think that's something we have to educate our local governments. Okay? Because later on, when you show a representation in local special bodies, you'll realize the problem. And there's limited access due to cycle of poverty, inherited human capital, largely because the PWDs are the most vulnerable. Okay? So because they're most vulnerable, the likelihood of being entrenched in that cycle of poverty, of lack of access, will be perpetuated unless we do something else. Okay? So and then the other is the lack of understanding and awareness of PWD needs. So again, that's connected to the idea of why we're establishing PDAO, why we're pushing for representativeness, and we're pushing for voice. Okay? So here I just wanted to highlight that the Republic Act 10070 was passed in 2010. The IRR was released in 2016. So RA 10070 is a step towards community-based rehabilitation. PDAOs are expected to inform PWDs of employment and training opportunities, issue IEDs, among others. And of course, when you heard the cases, you heard that, of course, a lot of the LGUs are actually going beyond, okay, these basic expectations. Okay, so what does the law say? So somebody was asking, tinignan namin dun sa case, what we did look at in the cases. So one is the designation or appointment of a focal person in consideration of budget restraints. Again, the word restraints is not mine. It's actually in the document. I asked myself, restraints ba talaga yan? Sabi niya, restraints daw talaga. I mean, the word restraints is really there. So I think that touches on the considerations. I think I guess that the law or the writers of the law recognize the limitations that LGUs have. So we end up executing based on certain constraints presented in our context. So the question then, of course, when we look at that is, does concurrent appointment apply? Okay? Would you consider that as compliance to the law? It's just like, I'm throwing it up there because obviously, you realize that in some cases, there is concurrent appointment. Okay? All LGUs officers are under the local chief executive. Again, not all the cases are like that. In some cases, they're still under the SWDO. Okay, but again, how do you interpret that law? I mean, all departments are under the local chief executive, or at least that's how some LGUs would justify it. Third, General Assembly as a requirement for PDAO head nomination. So in a number of the cases that we presented, actually the offices or the history of the offices predated the law and predated the IRR. So you have to understand that sometimes the LGUs tries to, in a way, sometimes in the selection process, tries to fit the existing structure into what the law mandates. Okay, so again, different stories for different contexts. And then PDAO head, PDAO instead of PWDs participate in the local development council. Okay, so I just mentioned that. I mentioned that largely because, okay, what is really the role of PDAO in terms of the special bodies in the cities? We'd like to look at that. So this is what the law says and some of the questions that it raises. So we also asked the NCDA's perspective about the law before we actually went to the field. So one of the objectives was measuring compliance with respect to the Republic Act in terms of whether there is an ordinance. So you hear a lot of the cases how there was an ordinance passed this year. Do they have a dedicated budget? Is it in the AIP? Do they have an office space? Because we were hearing that in some cases they were just pointing to a space, not necessarily a dedicated space. Do they have permanent plantilla, or they have job orders? So again, those are the things that we tried to monitor in terms of the cases, because when we look at the DILG's monitoring, sometimes it doesn't go into the details of these aspects of compliance. Okay, so sometimes it's also self-reporting. Okay, and then PDAO is not under SWDO. So the idea is that PDAO, for NCDA, PDAO should not be under the SWDO, since SWDO's mandate does not capture after the needs of PWDs. So this is from the perspective of the NCDA. But we, again, like you said, we noticed that in some of the cases, this is not followed. Okay? So the PDAO head membership under LSBs is a result of heads' advocacy efforts and time management. So the idea is that PDAO should be in the LDC because they are representing the sector. Okay, so that's an interesting question. Because that begs the issue then of, is the PDAO head a PWD? And begs the question of, does he have to be a PWD in order to advocate the interests of the sector? That's the root cause or the root reason behind that. Okay, which is again something that the cases try to answer. And then 100% compliance to GA requirement. So the law says, NCDA says that there should be a compliance to the General Assembly requirement expected in 3 to 5 years. I think in most of the cases, if not all the cases, activating the General Assembly has been problematic. Okay? And then absence of reliable empirical data on RA 10070 implementation impedes its scheduled review, which I guess is very understandable, considering that it's only in 2016 that the IRR was implemented, so we have no baseline to speak of. Or if we have a baseline, it's very, so to speak, unreliable. Okay? And I'll talk about why it is unreliable. So this is from the ILG data that only 6 out of 10 LGUs have PDAOs. Okay? There are 33 provinces with no PDAOs, 25 cities with no PDAOs, and 282 municipalities out of the 1,715 LGUs. Okay? Again, depends on whether you're a half full or half empty kind of guy. So I would consider this as a challenge, that 40% still don't have PDAOs. Here, you see the breakdown with respect to provinces and municipalities. And then one thing we try to disaggregate, and it says income class affects creation of PDAO in municipalities, meaning the poorer municipalities have the more difficult time in establishing PDAOs, largely because of budgetary constraints. So this is from our awareness survey. Like I said, this is hardly generalizable because it wasn't systematic, but the idea here is what are the sentiments on the ground or awareness on the ground in a larger sample, larger than the 7 that we had, 7 cases. So among the 230 survey respondents, okay, who are local legislators from all over the country, 40% already reported having a PDAO, okay, of whom 67% said they have an ordinance, and 19% have an EU. So they recognize the need to have a local law, okay, to backstop the establishment of the institution. So part of institutionalization. 47% reported having a focal person. So if you add 40 and 47, you would say, oops, there's like 87% have some compliance to the law. Okay? But if you add them together, you could argue that how reliable then is the ILG or how updated they are. Okay? Of the 47% who said there's focal persons, 70% said they were concurrent. Now that's problematic. Okay? When you say 70% are concurrent, some of them would be in the SWDO, some would be in peso. Okay? Which means there's no, when you have a focal person, they're not really very dedicated to the position. Okay? 70% of awareness survey did not match or were inconsistent with the LGPMS. Meaning, of the local legislators who said they have one, when we compared it to the ILG data, it didn't match either. It's a positive, negative, or negative, positive. So again, it's either an awareness issue among local legislators or a quality issue with respect to the monitoring of the LGPMS. And then 7.4% completely reported not having either a PDAO or a focal person. Now this one I think is for me more interesting. Okay, 44% of the respondents noted that the LGU PDAO head focal person is a person with disability. Again, it depends if you're a half empty or half full person. I would say it's, of course, I'm not a PWD. I would say this is a step forward. But only 33% said there's LDC representation, meaning the PDAO person, focal person, or head actually sits in the LDC. And what's more troubling for me is that only 17% are part of the local health board. Only 12% are part of the local school board. And you would see that it's easy to justify representation in these boards when you think about, of course, PWD as a health issue or PWD not having access to education. So it's very easy to think, why are they not there? Okay? And the 10% is, I think, what is this? Peace and Order Council. Okay, 10%. Okay? So one question is, are the interests and concerns of PWDs adequately raised at the local level? Okay? Even if you say, okay, you don't have to be a PWD to be a PDAO head, are there actually institutions, spaces, and mechanisms that you can guarantee to us that the interests of the PWD are heard? Even if you're a PDAO head, do you have mechanisms for organizing GAs, consulting the federations or the assembly? Okay? Or does the PDAO head have to be the one sitting in the local health board or the local school board? Okay? Can people in the GAs be the ones sitting there? Okay? Next question. SGLG mainstreaming. SGLG has been with us for quite a time. Okay? This was promoted by then Secretary Robredo. So the values is increasing overall uptake. So right now, 27% of LGUs have SGLG awards, whereas there was only 15% in 2014. So the reason I'm mentioning this is the SGLG has been effective as a way for incentivizing LGUs to comply. Okay? Except for first and sixth class municipalities, income does not determine SGLG compliance. Okay? And social protection is a core area of SGLG. Okay? This is the seal of good local governance. If you get a seal of good local governance, the LGU actually gains access to other national funds. So that's an incentive. Okay? So one question is, can PDAO compliance, I think in one case it was mentioned, be among the social protection indicators? Okay? Compliance with the accessibility law is one of those indicators. Okay? As the data shows, compliance with the accessibility law is actually increasing despite the fact that the accessibility law, there were indicators were being increased. Parang the criteria was increasing on a year-to-year basis, but at the same time, compliance has been increasing. Okay? In other words, compliance to this indicator is something that LGUs are striving for. Okay? And one question that we'd like you to think about is whether we could add more compliance indicators on accessibility that would push perhaps more greater compliance with respect to PDAO implementation. Okay? So compliance with the accessibility law is trending up but remains to be lowest among the 6th class LGUs. But in general, 6th class LGUs have 41%. The highest compliance, I think, is in 3rd class municipalities at 94%. Okay? But it's all trending up. So the issue of accessibility is the message there is being recognized by local government units. Reasons for non-compliance to PDAO. And this one, I think, is a mixed sources yung pinagkuhanan namin. Okay? Forms of non-compliance include concurrent assignment of a focal person, meaning their job is with PWDs, but they also have another job. PDAO unit is not under the LCE, but under the SWDO in many cases. There's a non-observance of the General Assembly requirement. This was documented in many of the cases and mentioned in some of our interviews. And the reasons are budgetary, non-prioritization of the ordinance, and the challenge of recruiting qualified PWDs in some cases. Okay, and then of course you've heard all the 7 cases earlier, and some of the insights are that there were LGUs already who started their offices prior to the law. Okay, and hence the compliance might be not perfect. There's an enactment of an ordinance is not equivalent to an implementation. Of course, there's always this time lag between ordinance and implementation. So maybe it's relatively new, the ordinances. The challenge of institutionalizing PDAO, creation and filing of plantilla items in PDAO units, is a problem. The management structure. Some of the cases try to put us order or draw a diagram of how it's organized. You could see simply from the way they describe the number of people, the items that they mention, that LGUs don't have a common structure for this. Okay? Of course, it depends again on many things. The budget. Okay, again, the budget varies from case to case. And of course, a dedicated space. Okay, even a dedicated space is a function also of the LGU. So some of the insights pertain to the need to manage the transition from SWDO to PDAO. Okay, so we recognize that early on, some of the tensions that we observed or heard from the cases pertain to turfing. To be the turfing between SWDO and PDAO, or sometimes it's the senior citizens and PWDs. There are varied team compositions. Okay, this one is an example of how varied the structure of the PDAOs are in the composition of the organization. So there's a large variance in terms of PWD personnel, not only in numbers, but number of PWDs they also employ and the kinds of tasks that they perform. The qualification requirements are sometimes a barrier to security of tenure. I think it was mentioned the civil service eligibility as sometimes being a barrier to actually finding a person to fill up the position. The other is the balance of direct PWD employment in PDAO. Okay? On one would quote, only a PWD can understand the needs and sensitivities of the sector. And another would say, if all are PWDs, it will be difficult. So this is a recognition, okay, that while PWD sentiments or PWD direct employment is important, it need not be all, okay? But the idea is you have to have PWDs in a department. PWD Federation, it was present in most of the LGUs that we studied, 5 out of 7, but General Assembly requirement was not observed. In our survey, in our informal survey, majority of those surveyed reported having PWD associations. What this means is that there are civil society organizations in most, if not all, LGUs. Okay? So part of the question then is how do you organize them? If a GA is a requirement, then perhaps the transitioning from SWDO to PDAO requires the SWDO activating that association. PDAO head skill sets. We said must be able to educate, empower, must be motivated and willing to assist others, officer support, and resourceful even beyond the budget. So that requires networking. I think that's one thing. PDAO as 3-in-1 is again recognizing how difficult the job of a PDAO head is. And sometimes the question then is, what are, when you say requirements for PDAO, would these requirements actually trump those civil service requirements? Okay? Another insight from the case is they're weak in monitoring. Okay, if compliance law on accessibility, discounts, HR complement, procurement, and PDAO creation. The other, I already mentioned this, PDAOs do not participate in most local special bodies, much less the PWD associations as representatives. No standard reporting of PWD information. I think it was very clear from different cases that the information was reported in different manners. Okay? So there's a need to standardize PWD classification for one. Need to standardize PWD projects for one. Okay? Need to be able to disaggregate them. Because in some of the cases, when you see how beautifully they disaggregated or how beautifully the data are, you could see the clear link between the data and the projects. And ideally, that's something that we could see eventually in all local governments in the future. So there are varied initiatives, and the varied initiatives capture the nuances and differences of the population in the different local government units. And of course, we always say it always starts with good data and good information. Okay? It's also good to actually learn from these different practices or see how different units are doing it, because that's the essence of decentralization. Okay, in conclusion, okay, PWD focal person can sometimes be reinterpreted the same way as they interpret GAD focal persons, and that's how they justify why there's concurrent posts. We need to understand the justification of creating PDAO under LCE and not under the SWDO as a mother unit. And I think part of that is recognizing that this is a special community or group with special needs who actually could advocate their needs much better. And the 6-year delay in the issuance of the IRR has created a de facto system, and this, in a way, is a barrier that we need to manage the transition. So dito nangyayaring turfing between SWDO or Senior Citizens Office, etc. So lastly, we have our recommendations. Okay, so again, many LGUs still do not have PDAOs or focal persons. So our recommendation is to incentivize PDAO creation through the SGLG. Okay, there's low awareness on RA 10070 among local legislators and poor appreciation of PDAO versus focal persons. So what we could do is for NCDA to work with the ILG on including sessions on disability inclusive governance in NEO and explain the rationale for dedicated personnel on PWDs. We should challenge the recruiting of qualified PWDs for PDAO head position, or at least revisit those qualifications and revisit the reasons why a lot of LGUs have difficulty in meeting those. There's no direct PWD representation in many LSBs. We should target key local special bodies, particularly the Local Development Council, the local school board, the RRMC, disaster mitigation, local health board in particular. We could advocate for expanded membership in this. Not necessarily just the PDAO head, but also PWD assemblies. There are different disability definitions and classifications, and this is one of our major recommendations, is for the community to develop a common PWD data dictionary or a data architecture. Okay? We should assign PDAO staff for database construction and updating, and we should link this database to a common platform or a registry at the national level. So that when we compare two different LGUs and talk about PWD percentages in the population, we're actually talking about the same thing. Okay? There's no apparent consensus in PWD preference. So one recommendation was actually to explore what Angeles City did, okay, with respect to the requirements that they proposed. There's an unfamiliarity and non-observation of General Assembly requirement. So we could capacitate and remind the DPOs and federations about this. But again, I think the other thing is if you are just transitioning from no PDAO to a PDAO, I think this task should fall in the hands of where PWD affairs currently fall. And I would say that's the SWDO. Problems with concurrent focal posts, explore arrangements that allow focal persons to be accorded department level posts. Although again, this might be difficult to generalize across all LGUs. There's weak monitoring accessibility LGUs, so promote codification of local PWD laws. Perhaps also adopt some, I think in some LGUs they have manual of operations, maybe that we could adopt. Not all LGUs have PWD federations, so make this part of the transition of preparation of the SWDO. Include in PDAO function its organizing function. Okay? There's tension and turfing between PDAO and related offices. I think we should be clear that we should expect the tensions. We should clarify the differences in mandates. We should be able to also start to budget and tag properly what items are PWD related and manage the transition. The last is a possible ortho-domination of policies and services. I think the idea that there are also within the sector underappreciated or underserved among the PWDs. But I think this also starts with actually being able to count them accurately, right? So it's somewhat still related to that database thing, okay? And the other is to be able to share good practices. I think this is one venue where we heard, even though briefly, what other LGUs are doing, and maybe try to adapt those other innovations in our context. Okay? Some other issues, because it's already time, mainstreaming PWD inclusivity into other LGUs, LGU offices, meaning it could cut across different departments. So again, more inclusivity, accessibility concerns. Incentivize barangay PWD desk officers. These are takeaways from some of the cases. Issue of rescue over privacy. I think these are applications of the RRM being able to identify where the PWD are in case of disasters. Clarify the 1% senior citizen PWD sharing. And again, this ties up to being able to actually tag how much we are really getting or providing PWDs. And last, value of a PWD federation in an amorphous group. I mean, it's also a little bit complicated to bring all those different PWD associations together. But recognizing that there's still value in a collective of associations might be important. Okay, thank you very much. So if you have questions, I'll be more than willing to answer them.